All right. So, Heather, over to you.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yes. And again, I know with Zoom, having a gallery, sometimes it's distracting. So if you want to take your video off, if you want to keep it on, that's okay. But definitely make sure you have our 4 panelists up there on the big screen. And then Elsie, let's just ditch the slides and let's dive into the collaboration and the panel, because I'm excited and I know a lot of great content will come out of tonight. But many of you know me, but I'll introduce myself. I'm here tonight for a dual role as that moderator. First and foremost, I'm the Awesome Women in Technology president. And so I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of you and your companies here in the tech world here in Austin. I've gained a plethora of knowledge for that. So I'm excited to chime in on there, but also for my day job, I've worked at Tech Systems the last 9 years. We are an IT services company, and I've been in the talent delivery space the last 5 here in Austin supporting the public sector. So excited to collaborate, and I'll kick it over to the panelists and I'll really let them introduce themselves, which is way better than reading the slide. But tonight we're here because the Austin tech market is one to watch. Everyone knows it. That's why this event interests you. That's why we're here talking about it. So panelists, as you introduce yourself, also share a few words about what you would say we're going to see in the major tech trends here in Austin in 2022. So Tara, let's start with you, and then we'll kick it over to Angela, Brian, and Kim.
And I did put the question that we want you all to answer in the chat. So a little bit about what's coming to Austin.
Tara, you're on mute.
I had to do the standard talk on mute, so thank you for that. I hope I can have ripped the Band-Aid for everyone else. So I'm Tara Wyverney. I'm the Vice President of Talent Development for Dev10. So my background has been in program development to solve technology shortages. I am the co-creator of the Dev10 program, which is what you saw Stephanie talk about. And I've been here at Genesis 12 years. So my passion, what I love to do is help people launch careers in technology. And specifically the last 5 years has been focused on how do we actually track and solve relevant current issues in the technology supply as it relates to talent. So I spend my days and nights, frankly, thinking about like what is happening in the markets, what are the big markets for technology, and how can we as a talent creation company help to create and solve and fill some of those gaps. So from my perspective in Austin, one of the really unique, really exciting things that's happening right now is that there's growth across the tech space. So there are incredible needs within those, traditional development roles, but we're starting to see a lot more opportunity within data and a few other places across, the tech heavy space. A lot of markets carry kind of niche titles, if you will, right? Like certain cities might be .NET shops or whatever that might be. Austin doesn't suffer from that. If you've got the skill, if you've got the interest, there's probably a technology role out there for you right now. So that's part of the reason that we're coming to and have thrived, I should say, in Austin, and certainly what I see continuing to be a challenge and an opportunity. I'll hand it off to, I think, Brian, maybe, or someone.
Angela, yeah, why don't you go, Angela?
All right. Thank you all for having me here. Welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Angela Means. I work for the City of Austin, the Development Services Department, the wonderful Development Services Department. I am one of the assistant directors led by our director, Miss Denise Lucas, who some of you all may know. Very excited. I've worked there for nearly 2 years so far. I have a passion and a very long history of working for local government. I've worked for the City of Austin for almost 15 years, and I started my career back in the city of San Diego, California, working for the city of San Diego there. I worked in primarily administrative and financial realms throughout my career. Currently, I'm the assistant director of our customer and employee experience area, where I oversee our information technology, our human resources, financial services, our stakeholder and community engagement, and our customer experience division, which is really our intake for our permit applications for the Development Services Department. If you don't know, the City of Austin is a large organization. We have probably over 14,000 employees at this time. We have grown tremendously since I've been here. That would be almost 15 years. We have a large operating and capital budget, almost $5 billion. So we're fairly large and we're always looking for top talent. What I'm seeing currently, we're seeing so much growth, and I've actually witnessed it over the last 15 years. I think it's exciting. I'm excited for Austin, and I'm specifically excited about the technology in Austin, Texas. I think there's a lot of opportunities for where we take the city. And currently, we're really heavily reliant on our technology solutions. The world has changed over the last 2 years. I don't have to tell you all that. And so what's happened is the organizations are really reliant upon technology solutions, and we're looking for people who are not just strong in their technical skills, but have an ability to work with people and to work as more of business consultants in these organizations so that they can merge that gap between what our needs are and what technology solutions are out there. Not just what's out there, but what could be. So it's a really good time, I think, for technology. Great time to be in Austin technology or in the city of Austin with your background in technology. So I look forward to the presentation and welcome again. And thank you for having me.
Cool. Well, I'll jump in. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Cheney. I have been an Austinite. Don't do the math, but since 1989, minus 1 year, I moved out to the Bay Area for Twilio and moved back for Indeed. So I've been in recruiting since 2004. Again, don't do math, no math. But I've been doing a whole bunch of different things. I was a marketer and I came into the recruiting space, and I've worked for a whole bunch of tech companies. So as we think about how we tell the story of what the experience we're selling, what are we offering, what are we delivering, that's my specialty. Again, been an Austinite for a long, long time, and worked at Twilio, IBM, most recently Indeed, was there for a long time. And so being in recruiting, but also working at Indeed means I have a great passion for helping people find jobs, and then also helping them think about how to search and find those jobs, because everybody searches differently. And if you've ever searched for an appliance or a shirt online, you know that everybody searches differently. We all use different keywords, and we're all going to come up with something slightly different. And then we're going to see it in our Gmail ads for 6 months. But beyond that, I work at a company called WorkRise. And what that is, that model is actually very similar to the Dev 10 model, where there are workers and they need to learn, they need to develop themselves, and they need to find consistent work. But we do it for the skilled trades. So when you think about a journeyman electrician or a plumber or someone to work in construction or defense, all those different, like really hard, you're going to get dirty kind of jobs, we actually help them find the work, upskill them, and then keep their work consistent. But we do that with technology. So while the people that we empower do a lot of dirty work, we are a tech company and we do a lot of things, and we're hiring developers specifically right now, front-end development, but a lot of other things in and around Austin. And I'll also throw in there, I'm putting my my LinkedIn link in the chat. So for those of you who want to connect, great. For those of you who don't want to connect, I've also put a fun fact in the chat about myself. So I will also say that one of the things that I think is happening now is, over the last couple of years, number one, everybody panicked and had to figure out what are we doing. But we're also re-examining the purpose of the office. The office used to be a beacon of real estate expense that was really one of the things that we would use when I was at Indeed to seal the deal. People would be like, oh yeah, maybe I thought about Indeed to work, or maybe I thought about Indeed as a place to find a job somewhere else. But when they came into the office, they were like, oh wow, you've got a freaking barista and you've got all these other things. Like, seriously, it's nuts. But you've got all these things and you're coming into the space, and now it's like, what's the point of the office? Why are we here? How are we connecting? How are we advancing our careers, building the relationships that we need to get the opportunities long-term within an organization? So I think that's going to change. And I'll drop another link in the chat a little bit later on about how the purpose of the office could change to be more like a clubhouse, more social interaction and things like that. So I'll share that in a little bit. But yeah, that's me. And I think, Kim, you're up next.
I think so. Well, I have you beat. So I moved to Austin in 87, but I did leave for 11 years. So I was like one of those people who the moment I graduated from UT, I was like, I got to get out of here. Went to both coasts. And of course, after 11 years on both coasts, I said, how do I get myself back to Austin? So left, came back. I am currently the CMO, actually at a Colorado-based company, but I'm building a marketing team that is remote and hopefully building a team that has some roots in Austin as well. But I have spent 20 years in tech, started in PR, did some management consulting at Deloitte, spent a lot of time in M&A, finally picked my major in marketing, and have been in the Austin tech market at Dell, AMD, IBM as well. So similar to Brian, and now at Zayo. And Zayo is a $2 billion revenue company that went private about 18 months ago. So we are in a transformation phase and we're just building from the ground up. So it is a blast right now. But building a marketing team from the ground up is hard, as you guys could probably expect right now. And one of the trends that I'm seeing, especially in the Austin market, but really across the board, is the impact of affordability on employees' decisions in terms of flexibility, remote, in the office. And Austin, as you guys probably know, our affordability is a real crisis. I'm also in my side gig is the steering committee lead and chairperson for the Women's Fund at the Austin Community Foundation. So I spend a lot of time kind of digging into affordability and the challenges, especially within the Central Texas area. And what I've found right now in building a marketing team is that the challenges around affordability and what that means for commuting into an office where people are living is a really big hurdle. But as is like childcare, and affordability really impacts that as well. And so those are some of the things that I'm thinking about as I build my team, because I am a proponent of collaboration and spending time together, especially for marketing, as we have more early career professionals in marketing and wanting to build that team that really spans across generations. Having in-person connections are really important. But as I look at the affordability challenges and the flexibility that my prospective employees are demanding, trying to figure out that balance is hard. And so that's the biggest trend that I'm seeing in Austin. And I think it's on us as potential employers to figure out how do we balance the need for collaboration and connection and culture, along with the need for flexibility and enabling people to be their best selves, both at work and at home.
Awesome. Well, I know we've already hit a bunch of topics even in just the first go around, and I'll really kick it off here with Tara, the first question. Something I hear all the time, whether you're a job seeker or you're hiring, specific technologies come and go, and keeping up with the trends is a job in itself. So Tara, for people wanting to break into some of these new spaces, for trends that we hope will stick around for a while, what are some skill sets that are really hot right now?
Absolutely. So I'll talk about my spot, and then hopefully some of my fellow panelists will chime in as well, because I'm definitely very tech heavy, I should say. So what we've seen recently is there's some good standards that are still what I consider new. So when you start talking about technologies, certainly React is something that is being adopted at large scale across the board from a front-end development language. If you have not had exposure, you're more an Angular or something like that, I just see that as a good stalwart, if you will, to go to learn, to get yourself a lot of opportunities. I think, Brian, you're currently hiring someone in that space, that front-end development space, right? So front-end development is huge. Everyone's moving to those web app-based technologies versus those, old school desktop technologies. And that's just the norm now. But I will say, specific to my space, I'm seeing a big trend towards that DevOps, as specifically the DevSecOps, the idea of really integrating security right into how you build your application versus, say, kind of a perimeter technology around applications. And so with that, that's certainly driving a lot of those DevOps tools, right? So when you're starting to look at new technologies that are coming in, I don't see those going away. I think they're getting embedded into how development shops are working today. And so getting experience, getting exposure into those DevOps and DevSecOps tools, I think is going to be really helpful for people to pivot and grow their careers technically. The other space that I see really branching off from development, which is good and should happen, is the data space. We're seeing the data space really start to stand on its own in terms of data engineering, data analytics, learning tools like Tableau, Power BI, Python, Pandas, Kafka. If you can learn Kafka for real-time data streaming, it's pervasive across every single business now, right? So everyone's trying to harness the power of data. There are technologists embedded in marketing, in manufacturing and operations. And so those are also skill sets that I see as being really beneficial now that they're kind of peeling that off the traditional developer space. For me, I think that's something that's cool and that we're seeing as a trend across the market.
Have a good night. Be safe out there.
Keep going, Tara. Anything else?
No, that's it. I know that a couple other people want to chime in. Angela specifically.
Yes. I agree with everything that you said. I mean, especially in terms of the data analysis, the use of Power BI and just data analytics, and any other tool that you could provide to help tell the story about the organization's business. And so I see that's very important for us, very important for the city of Austin, and I think that's a good skill to have if you don't already. Another area that we're finding with our technology working in the city of Austin is there is a strong need for our technical staff to really understand the business needs. And I refer to it as being like a consultant, like a business partner. So when you're at the table and you're listening to our managers express some of their concerns or suggestions on where they would like to take the services that we provide, I like when our technology staff kind of step in and bridge the gap of understanding on what is possible when it comes to the world of technology. So that's the skill set that we've recently really started to hire specifically for, just because it's been a challenge in the past. Just the level of understanding, technical staff are very, very good. They're very, very good at communicating technical language, but unfortunately, a lot of times there's a misunderstanding in communication. So what we're finding is we need to make sure that we're hiring individuals on both ends, managers as well as our technical staff, that can help work together, be more collaborative, and partner with one another to identify ways to serve our customers better. And our customers are internal and external. I'll reference our customers a lot because working for the city of Austin, that is what we do. We provide services to a multitude of individuals out there. So we are always looking for ways to do what we do better. And so technology, as I stated earlier, has become our go-to for solutions, because you can't just throw money at a problem all the time. You need to look for more creative ways to do it. And we have found that technology has really served us well. So if I would say looking, those skills, just those soft skills, those consultant, business partner skills is what we're looking for.
Okay, does anybody have any questions about what are the hot trends right now? We did have one question from Linda. Is there any advantage between hybrid versus fully remote company cultures? I don't think that's specific to this first question. So maybe we can address that at the end, or maybe think about that as you're answering other questions to our panelists. I do think we have some questions that will touch on that. So Linda, I'm gonna hold that one to the end and see if we can come back to it. But with this particular question, one thing that kind of crossed my mind is in terms of breaking into these spaces, like I personally work for a very small company. Do you think it's good for people to try and specialize very much in, let's say, DevOps or SecOps or business analyst, or is it better to be more of a generalist and be able to wear several hats?
I mean, I can jump in on that one. I think it really depends on, where you are in your career and what your company needs. So, my goal is to always be an impact player, right? So in some situations, being an impact player is being a generalist, meaning that I can jump in and help support and identify, the next big challenge to go tackle. Sometimes like being an impact player is being discipline centric and being a specialist. And so I think, that question really depends. And I think it also depends on what your end goal is in terms of career trajectory and progression, because, being a specialist can get you, a very different career path than being a generalist can. As a CMO, for me, being a generalist, like that is my secret sauce. But there are other CMOs who come up through a specialist route and have succeeded because they understand the ins and outs of a specific discipline within the marketing function. So I do think, ultimately, the question you should be asking yourself is not, should I be a generalist or a specialist, but how do I be an impact player, and understanding what being an impact player means within your company or organization and the business objectives that the organization is trying to achieve. So that's like a great way of just not answering. It's like answering with a riddle, that question.
No, I think that's a perfect answer. We do probably need to move on to the next question just for the sake of time. But maybe, Tara, if you could respond to Nopur about in the chat perhaps on the training timeline for a data analyst, that would be really helpful. All right, Heather,
Awesome.
What is your next question?
Yes. Now, don't cringe when I say this, but the topic is talent shortage. And I know if I had $1 for every time we heard that phrase, we'd all be able to buy homes here in Austin. But Kim, you just talked about this as a CMO, you're in a hiring capacity. So I'm going to ask you, what roles specifically at your company are you struggling to fill?
Right now, the biggest gaps that we have is on the demand gen and the digital marketing side. So I'm just starting to ramp up marketing ops. What's been great is I've been able to hire my leadership team. So that was really, I wanted to focus on building a really strong leadership team, because ultimately I know that people want to work for their boss. They're less concerned about working for a company. Like the culture is set by your manager, your manager's manager. And so having that leadership team in place was really important for me in order to really hit the ground with more force in terms of recruiting, because I know how important seeing that leadership team structure, seeing the culture that the leadership team is setting. But, we have been having challenges right now in finding great digital marketers, finding great account-based marketers, demand gen leaders. And so what I had to step back with my leadership team last week on is, okay, guys, like, I think we're trying to be too specific, right? Going back to this question of generalist or specialist. And we're looking for people that are going to check all these boxes when really what we need are impact players. And people who are agile and want to learn and want to jump in and solve problems. And so what that's done is like, we've kind of gone back to the drawing board and said, well, who are people that we trust? Who are people that we know are curious? They're agile. They take calculated risks. And like, let's worry less around checking all these boxes and really think about the type of impact players that we want on this team. And so that has changed, that mindset shift has really changed the way that we're trying to solve for the talent shortages that we have on our team right now. And so that's really helped us kind of, change our perspective and think about staffing that team a little bit differently.
Yeah, if anyone has more questions about this topic, please feel free to put them in the chat and I'll make sure that we ask them. those of you who know me, I always have questions about questions. But let's say I'm not looking for a leadership job. What can I ask if I'm interviewing to find out about the leadership and the culture of the leaders?
I mean, I'll answer this one and then I'll pass it over to anyone else who wants to talk for a moment, because I feel like I've been talking a lot. But, you know, I always say, like, in a lot of ways, I ask you for your references and you are allowed to ask me for my references. And so as a leader, I am more than happy to put you in touch with people who currently work for me or who have worked for me in the past, to understand the type of leader I am, how I run a team, how I bring collaboration to bear in the team. And that, you know, understanding what my references look like is a completely fair question. And I wish more people would ask me for those references.
I think that is excellent.
Great. Yeah, I never would have thought to ask for my interviewers' references. So thank you.
Right, I think that's great. And I've interviewed individuals who've asked, you know, us at the end of the interview, for us to explain the culture and our leadership style and the leadership team and how we work together. And so I've always enjoyed that, because it shows that you really are interested in the culture that you're even interested in. So, or working for that organization. So I think it's excellent. People have an opportunity to do that. Please take advantage of those interviews, because it's just not one way. It's meant to be an interview on both sides to make sure it's a good fit. So absolutely.
I'd like to add one more thing to that, what you said, Angela, 100%. I will add a little bit around like double clicking on some of those things. Because when you ask people questions, the general assumption that in a job interview, people are giving you the answer that you want to hear, right? And then you double click into a specific detail around that. Well, I do the same thing, right? You have to flip it around with the interviewer. Oh, we have a great culture. Okay, what does that mean? When was the last time you felt your great culture, and what did that mean to you, and what was actually different about that culture, right? So I think culture is this great word, and it means something different to everybody. So for me, I'm a recruitment marketer, which means I spend most of my days talking to employees about their experience. And so I do that same thing. I ask them, how's your experience been? What's been your path to this role? And they give me bullshit answers the first time. They really do. And then you're like, great. Well, when was the last time you worked hard, and what did that mean to you? Yes, I went to the work hard, play hard diatribe. So sorry. But asking them for a detail specific to that. The only other tip that I'll give as you're looking at individuals and teams and companies is, if it is a role that existed before and you're a backfill, if it is a backfill role, I typically will go and I will source the person who left the company. Then I'll message them and I'll ask them why they left. And I'll ask them about their experience working for that company. Those people are really willing to spill the beans. And I'm just telling you, I have had so much success with that, because number one, most people don't do it. So if you can source or find the person who left the company, even if you just ask the word, hey, so who left the role? If this is a backfill, and you can actually do your own research to say, what's the real story? That's my little tip on something that I've learned over the years.
And I know we tangented a little bit, but again, I know the original question was the hot skill sets, right? I think, again, there's a lot of people on here who are either looking for jobs, looking to career switch, right? And they're kind of wanting to know, what are some of these areas that aren't going away anytime soon? I feel like I hear cybersecurity a lot, like automation, artificial intelligence, right? There's the buzzwords, but any specific skill sets that people who want to get curious should dive into.
Yeah, I would double down on the React. I see that in the chat, and I think Tara mentioned it. But yeah, that user experience, like being a developer who understands the importance of user experience, is key. My 2 cents.
Awesome. Well, Brian, let's keep with you. This next question I'll ask is attracting and retaining talent. right? Again, a lot of companies are on here, but also a lot of people who are looking for jobs, and making that match is always the key, right? So attracting and retaining talent's been a struggle for the tech industry, but in Austin, we're really feeling that, right? Especially when companies could be remote. They're recruiting out of Austin for other states. And so we're feeling that heat. So if you're a company and you're hiring, what are some innovative ways to make your specific position stand out? How do you entice someone, especially in a virtual world, to want to pick your company?
Well, first, it's not put a whole bunch of copy and paste garbage in the job description. I think that's what a lot of companies do. What tends to happen is the hiring manager finally gets their rec approved. They want to hit the gas. They're like, okay, go. Why don't you have candidates yet? Well, I need a job description. And so they're like, oh, fine. And they go back and they dig out and dust off the previous crappy job description. And then they'll look at the long bulleted list of requirements. And so that's one of the first things that I do is I actually advise the companies that I work for, but I'm also doing this. I've done it a little bit when I was at Indeed for some of the other companies, but it was also like, what do you really need? What is the job title actually being called? What are people searching for? So there is a little known fact at Indeed, you can actually search for some of the hiring insights. So they'll give you data around what roles are people searching for, and you have to give them a big bucket, like it's going to be sales, or it's going to be engineering, or it's going to be product, right? But then they'll give you the actual data behind what are people searching for, what are the specific terms, and then I use that as a starting point to tell my hiring managers, you got the wrong job title. I don't care what it means here. I don't care that that's existed for 3 years. That's not my go-to-market strategy. A legal HR document is not a marketing, selling, recruiting document. So that's the first big piece is let's make sure that we've got the right information for that audience. And then the other one is, do you really need to know that someone has to be an expert communicator? No. Well, that's like, you have to function as a human in business today. Yes, that's obviously, you don't need that bullet, take it out. So I got to the point where we would get, no joke, 28 bullet lists. Oh, these are our requirements. Are they really? And so then what's unique about this? Well, it was in the last job description. Great. How did that work out? And so we go through and we're more reductive
Hey, Siri,
around.
close the shades.
I love that Siri is controlling your shades. Sorry, I'll
Hey,
pivot back.
Mofo Pad, mute your microphone.
So I'll stop. I can go on a rant a lot about job descriptions, but I think that's a big part where you have to say, what are you really looking for? Let's dig in and let's actually make a document that tells people what they're going to expect, the skills that they have to bring. And not only that, what's the impact that they're going to have in the first 3 months, 6 months, 1 year in the role. So if you focus on impact, then somebody's going to go, oh, that's actually what I'm going to be able to do and accomplish, because it is a selling statement. Yes, there's requirements, but they don't need to read the requirements. That's the recruiter's job. Once you know you can do the job, then you got to figure out, okay, do I have those specific things that the hiring manager says that they want? And it's all part of the process. I'll stop ranting.
And Brian, you're hitting a lot of chords, and I know Bruce, Andrea, Amanda, they're all in the public sector here. And I think that's definitely one of the areas that have a little more scrutiny about how they write the job descriptions, right? And so Brian's saying, or Bruce is saying, tell us about what is really a good job posting versus a bad job posting. And do you have any examples that we could potentially share in the recap? Because again, for everyone on here, by getting you checked in, we'll note that you're here. We'll send you out a recap email and we'll get to send some this. So for the public sector and private sector, really what makes a good versus bad job posting?
I love the chat right now. Don't say rock star, ninja, guru, any of these words that are super open for interpretation and just sound like fluff. And as someone who has to write job descriptions all the time, like I 100% get it. And it is hard to write a good job description. But Brian, what would you suggest if for potentially a small company or somewhere where I need to write a job description for a role that maybe we've never had someone doing that role. Right. And so what kind of resources can people look for to write good job descriptions?
Well, the first thing that people usually do is they'll get on Google, which will then go to Indeed, and and sorry, I'm a bit biased after having been there for 6 years, but that's where a lot of people go. They'll look for other job descriptions. They'll look for other jobs that are posted like that. And then they'll pick apart or they'll add stuff to it. And what they're effectively doing.
Don't call me out, Brian. I did it today. Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed.
I didn't mean to make you feel attacked. I'm sorry, Kim. But it happens, right? So people, it's a whole lot easier to move paint around on a canvas than to throw paint on a canvas, on a white canvas for the first time. So it's understanding what people need to search for. So back to what I said a long time ago, is that everybody searches differently. So the job that you're searching for that role could be called something completely different in another coast who's hiring for a remote worker. So you have to look at, okay, what are they, if I'm looking for this job, I need to look for this job using Bay Area terms or NYC terms, and understanding that particular, there's obviously going to be some stuff that crosses over. But how I usually like to do it is I go for the companies that have the really good reputations, and I'll start there. And I know that they're hiring the appropriate tech stack because they'll have the specific key things in there. So I don't just look for job titles or keywords necessarily. I will start with a company. Believe it or not, T-Mobile has amazing job descriptions. So a lot of ones, like as an example, and they say stuff, right? You can't do everything that they can do, but they'll, instead of what does this job entail, it'll say, what do you tell your friends at parties, right? And so like, that's just a different way to phrase how all those things, like how can we pull the elements of the culture into the job description itself? But I would start with a company there that I know is hiring for that skill set and pull out those, and then look for the kinds of brands, right? So I'm a brand guy, but I'm going to look for the kinds of brands that have a good story to tell, and then how they express that in that specific job description are a lot of the things that I use.
And to my credit, I did actually go look specifically for another CMO who I really respect. And I know that they write good job descriptions. So I didn't just Google, but I did go look at some people that I know I really trust their opinion and how they think about things. So I just want to qualify a little bit.
No judgment.
So Linda had a question related to this. She says, I like to ask during interviews questions that help me understand what type of investment companies make on their current resources, in addition to salary. A different way to retain current resources. So what type of questions during interviews can be asked to address this? And I think that very much follows along, right? Like, what are your innovative ways to hire, right? Like, how do I ask, what are you doing to retain your current employees?
I'll chime in. I think there's a few different ways that you can ask that, because there's the marketing approach of, and I mean that in terms of what you're going to get at the party line, like, oh yeah, we make, training a priority and we have these tools available to you. I think asking personally about, what has been your training and development within this organization, or what type of resources have been made available to you, individual interviewer, to help you grow within this organization. I think getting their firsthand account, I'm sure they have tools, I'm sure they have investments and platforms. I think every company now has some sort of learning platform, right? So I would really dig into how they've approached it personally, and then try to maybe double click, like Brian said, into that. And so learn more about, okay, what were the tools? How was that enabled by your leadership team to be able to continue investing in yourself?
And I know this is a panel on hiring, but I also just want to put a plug in for, like, once you're on board and working with your manager, because I think what happens so many times is, like, people will make an investment in your development if you ask for it. I mean, I've never asked a question about learning and development, but with every boss I've ever had, I have asked for sponsorship and support My company has paid for Fortune's Most Powerful Women. My company has paid for, ongoing conferences and training. My company has paid for, other ways for me to get, mentorship platforms, et cetera. And so I know this is about recruiting, but I also just want to put a plug in for, if you are a high potential team member, you are an impact player, and you have rationale for why you need to be at Fortune's Most Powerful, or to be at, the content marketing summit, or to be at, a GitHub, whatever, like, you make that pitch, and like, people will, like, your manager will support you more than likely if you are doing what you need to do to drive business outcomes. So just a pitch for folks, like, make the ask.
Awesome. Well, we'll keep monitoring the chat, but we'll move to the next question. And Angela, I'll ask you this. So we're only getting quicker with the times, right? Day and day, everyone's urgency, we're all connected all the time. And I think the interview process had to follow suit. So would you say the interview process and onboarding process has evolved over the last few years?
Well, I would say it definitely has for us. Over the last 2 years, it's just been a whirlwind. Our department, just to give you an idea of our size, the Development Services Department, we have around 500 employees. And within the last fiscal year 2021, we hired or promoted around 100 employees. And so that's a huge number of staffing that we're bringing into new positions during a pandemic. We're hybrid, sometimes we're virtual, sometimes we're in the office. And our goal is to make sure that we have employees come into our system and that they're set up for success. That's the number one goal of ours. We want them to have a very good experience. So what we do is, in addition to making sure that we go through our recruitment process, trying to identify the top talent and expediting those recruitment efforts, we've created a 30, 60, 90-day onboarding plan. And what that does is that guides our employees so that they know what's expected of them over the next 30, 60, 90 days. The first 30 days, we want them to just really, understand what their environment is, who the people are, the processes, the policies, and just a review. Those next 60 days, we want that individual to start to evaluate and assess their current position, looking at our processes and beginning to provide their recommendations at that moment. The 90 days, we're looking to, optimize and get an action plan in place. So we like to provide this to them so that they know exactly what's expected of them. Our city also has a success strategy performance review, and that's where our employees work closely with their supervisor to understand what's expected of them. There are competencies, there's leadership development opportunities. So it's really meant to lay out the framework for that employee over the next year. We start with our plan in the fiscal year, and then mid-year we do a review of how well that employee is doing, provide any opportunity to give them additional guidance and support. The staff can then, request additional information from their manager at that point. And then at the end of the year, of course, we do our review. But what we try to do is not just wait and have something so formal that the employee doesn't know what's expected and where they go from here. We want to, make sure that they have everything that they need. And a big part of that is understanding what the employee wants to get out of this, out of their role. And so looking for opportunities for growth, if they want to take on leadership opportunities, they want to shadow someone, if they want to learn a new skill. We're really trying to be flexible and partner with our staff so that they have a good experience with our organization and for their career long term.
Brian, did you want to chime in? It seems like you have a bit to say about this.
Don't mind me. I'll just sit over here in the chat.
No, I love it. I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah, I'm surprised nobody's taken me up on the Ron Burgundy reference. They haven't typed in anything inappropriate because I will straight up say that out loud.
I think I may have actually, but I made it a private chat.
Yeah, you did. I actually saw that. That was enough for me to go, I almost did that. And I appreciate that. But no, I think as we look at qualifications, that's the tough part of filtering out because what happens is a hiring manager has a set of requirements or what they think the requirements are, but a lot of them can't always be mapped back to impact or success for you in the role. So that's a question that I recommend you ask the recruiter. I love really puzzling recruiters, by the way. And as some of y'all may know, because the market is nuts right now, the market for recruiters is also a bit cray cray. So that particularly is something that I like taking advantage of. So I'll ask the recruiter 5 questions that I know that they can't answer about the role. It's really easy because I do stuff within recruiting that not everybody knows about. But what that also does is that tells the recruiter that you know your stuff, you know enough to ask the question, and you're not afraid of addressing those gaps. Because one of the biggest things you can say is, hey, I noticed you have this listed on when you get to the conversation, right? So not everybody, maybe you decide not to apply to it, but if you're getting to the conversation, you can say, how does this particular experience map back to my success in the role, or what impact the hiring manager is looking for? And most of the time, the recruiter may not have the answer to that, but what that does is it gives them fodder to share back with the hiring manager after that first screen. You can't always bluff, but sometimes it works.
Typically on the interview process and the onboarding process, and I'll speak maybe to my company and the experience that I've had is, I think we all know that the interview window has shrunk dramatically, right? In terms of if you want to act on top talent, you make the decision, right? So gone are the days of the long drawn out process. And we'll talk about that, I think, in a few questions. But from an onboarding perspective, I think one of the things that I've really seen develop within my team and the teams that I support it is almost a more disciplined approach, like what Angela was talking about, to make sure that we no longer have the luxury of people being able to, through osmosis, learn their job and be able to onboard, right? So I think we've built a lot of discipline around how we communicate, how we engage, and how we support people, because you have to. It's just we don't have that proximity as a buffer anymore. So I think it's really, I think for my team, it's improved our onboarding. And in turn helped us improve our client onboardings as well for our consultants, because we've learned a lot from our own pitfalls of ill preparedness for a remote start, right? So I think that's a benefit, and regardless of what happens, hybrid work, remote, or whatever, I hope that continues to be a trend that I see. It's just people are slightly more prepared for your arrival. I mean, there's also the polar opposite where someone still can show up and they're like, oh yeah, you're starting today. But
Hey,
I feel like at least on my teams, that's diminished greatly compared to when it was in person.
right. And I will definitely concur. You definitely have to expedite the process, the recruitment process. You know, local government sometimes can take time just because we want to make sure all of the boxes are crossed. But I'll tell you what, now what's happening is we are competing for top talent with all of the other organizations in the city. All of the great companies that are relocating here into Austin, that's now part of we're all competing for the same talent. So you have to get creative on how you recruit, how you reach out and specifically target top talent in Austin. You know, back in the day, government used to just post those jobs out there for people to just apply. Now we're looking at other opportunities to get out there and be more aggressive in ways to secure some of the talent in Austin.
I will share one element that we've used. I keep saying we because I've been in this role at WorkRise for like all of 6 weeks. So my we is Indeed. And Indeed is if you've ever heard a rumor about Indeed, it's probably true, in that it's an amazing place to work and they take care of employees really, really well. Hands down, best company I've ever worked for. But what I will say is the interview experience is very, very different. And as you can imagine, as I mentioned before, we would bring people into the office, walk them around, show them the coffee bar, the ping pong tables. Sorry, I went there. But if we show them the space, right, which is an amazingly beautiful space that nobody's been to lately. But if you show them that space, they get that emotional connection. Oh, this could feel cool here. And what we shifted in March of 2020, we panicked along with everybody else. We panicked. While we did virtual interviews before, it wasn't the standard. So we actually realized in March of 2020, after we panicked and all went home, we were like, oh, we don't have an interview guide for people who are just interviewing remotely. So we had to really quickly turn around, and I was on that team of, okay, we have to build an interview guide, not just for the candidates, because the candidates are now, we have to walk them through that process and educate them on, because they're not all familiar with Zoom. Right now, it's a little bit different where people have built in that a little bit of that muscle memory, whether it's Zoom or some other platform. But back then it was just like, holy crap, why do we not have this already? So we went through a whole bunch of change and realizing how do we interact differently. But one of the elements that we added in the in-person, we had, believe it or not, an interview kit. So you walked in the door and we handed you a bag, and it was a branded bag, and it had a notepad in there, and it had a coffee tumbler, and it was somebody walking you through. You actually got swag just for coming to interview face to face. And that stopped when we stopped going face to face. But one of the things that I implemented before we left that I think is really, really cool, I am biased, but to take an element of that, to really step up that experience, is we actually said, we had email that went out to people. We set up a store, essentially a one-page website. And in the email, in your process, as you got set up for the interview, you said, there was a message that said, hey, we want to thank you for your time. Here's a website, here's a specific code. And you went to that site and input your code, and you got to pick from one of 3 different pieces of swag. And so they were a little bit higher end pieces of swag than what we did, just because of budget. But you got to pick something that was like, hey, Indeed wants to thank me for spending my time. The really cool piece is that the 4th option was, if you want to donate the value of that to a local charity, then there was an option for that as well. So it's just understanding that there's an exchange there. You're spending your time, you're having that investment. And I know a lot of companies don't do that at the interview level, but some do. So it's really saying, okay, what are other companies doing to recognize that I'm investing, in Indeed's case, 7 to 9 hours of my time on an engineering interview loop. It's a lot of time. It's a big investment. So that was just one of the things that we did, but I'm curious if anybody else has heard of cool things that companies are doing.
Yeah, I think Renee Diaz chimed in with a little bit. And one of the great points that she puts in here is candidates are off the market in 4 business days. I mean, that is like record quick timelines. What do you do if your company's HR department doesn't move that fast? Right? Like, how do you guys respond? I mean, I think it's kind of a problem sometimes at big companies.
I mean, it is, right? I mean, it takes time for us to go through I also think, I mean, that is in a lot of ways an unreasonable amount of time. Like, I don't even think a candidate can get to know a company, or a company can get to know a candidate in that amount of time. And so, you know, while I like appreciate that people are moving fast, I mean, you know, personally, right, this is me, you know, in my career talking, but I've never applied for a job online. And that's not how I would ever find a job, right? Because the only thing I care about is who I work for. I have had, you know, 9 amazing bosses and 1 horrible boss. And, you know, I can say, like, you know, I didn't trust my gut on the one horrible. Everyone else I knew either from my network or a recommendation or a connection. And ultimately, like, I know that I need more than 4 days to get to know the potential company that I want to go work for and make an impact at. So I think, you know, while I appreciate that we have to move fast, I also know that I want this to be a great fit on both sides. And so, like, I'm usually talking to people before they're looking for a job, or I'm reaching out to people in my network, getting referrals, getting recommendations. I do a lot of like informational like walks at Town Lake and talking to you and wanting to like create roles for people. And I think the 4 days is a lot of pressure. And I think it also leaves a lot of room for hiring the wrong person. That's my perspective. And I know that's the reality right now, but I'm also willing to take the chance that, you know, my network is going to help me find the right person who's going to be a great fit versus trying to compete with, you know, somebody who's applying online, who doesn't know anything about my business, who doesn't know who I am as a leader, who doesn't really know like what we're trying to achieve. And I'm willing to invest that time in getting to know people. And I hope that they're willing to invest that time in getting to know us as well.
And I'll just say, I know not everyone has that luxury, right? And that's why places like Austin Women of Technology exist. Yep. For those of you who have moved here, taken a chance on this city and don't know anyone, that's why we're here, right? We love organizations like this and we encourage and want people to network, but we obviously know that's not the case for everyone, right? And so I want to make sure people know that's why I would say there's been a rise in things like contract jobs, because the market is moving so fast. It's saying, hey, a contract is a little less scary to take because it's not a full-time, but it's also like not everyone wants that contract job, right? And so I absolutely know that not everyone has that advantage, right? And that's amazing that you've been here and have that network there, Kim. And hopefully we can become that network for those of you here on this call that don't have that. But I think also just like finding a warm relationship using your connections, right? And Diane Kenyon, who's on here, always says, if you go to a networking event without a clear goal in mind, you know, you don't get out of it what you put into it. So when you're networking with people, make sure you're intentional. Hey, I applied to your company. I know we just met, but can you help push my name along, my resume along? Do you think I should message that person on LinkedIn? I applied there. Is that going to come off uncomfortable to them or pushy, or is that a great, you know, persistent step? So I think just like asking these advocates these kinds of questions too, when you can't always push your network. So just wanted to chime in there.
Like, and ask, right? I mean, personally, I've had more like informational coffee chats with folks in the last 2 years than I've had in a while. And people that reach out to me and ask me for an hour of my time, like I'm usually willing to give it to them. And so I think you'll find that when you reach out to network and you reach out to people and you have a specific, you know, ask, like, you know, and it's not an ask of like, can you help me? But it's more like, I want your advice. I want to hear what your thoughts are on X, Y, and Z. You know, what do you think about this? Like leaders are willing to give you that time. And so I think, you know, we just need to be better at you know, being bold and making the ask.
Well, and I'm going to stick with you real quickly, because another thing that I love, right, is when people are like, oh, you must have 10 years of experience for a tool that's been around for 2 years. Right. But then there's junior level roles, and it's someone's like, hey, I'm junior in that skill set, but I'm not junior in my professional world. And I think that's when having a warm connection in that network really helps that. But so Kim, I'll ask you, I mean, places like Genesis 10, that's amazing. And like WorkRise, that there's companies that are here to do that training. But when there's no entry level jobs anymore, how are people getting experience, Kim?
I mean, every which way. And I think that's the beauty, right? I mean, being able to tell a story. So every year I go and I present at a UT class. And then every year I go out to LA. I did my MBA at USC. And so I go out to USC and present at an MBA level strategy class. And like, you know, talk to folks and start to build those relationships and bringing in, because we do, especially in marketing, we need entry level and early professional hires. Like that's an important piece of like the career trajectory and how we build that funnel of folks along the career path. And every time I go have those conversations in the university, like I encourage them, like when I was getting my MBA, I did 85 informational interviews. Like literally, I called up people for 2 years. I even had a job. I got a job during the summer before I went to Deloitte full time. And I still did these informational interviews. And I called people, I mean, like an SVP at Starbucks did an informational interview with me, like just because I asked. And so I always encourage to ask, number one, to like talk to those folks, understand what are the things within, you know, their world that they're looking for so that you can start to craft your story. And then all of these things outside of work are places that you can get that experience. So whether like you volunteer somewhere, you know, and you like, I've hired people that have volunteered in nonprofits and done social media for those nonprofits, being involved in, you know, school related activities and having some of that experience, having, you know, put themselves through a training or an apprenticeship type of program. So I've really looked at like, but you have to be able to tell the story, and you have to be able to talk about how those things that you've done in your quote unquote extracurricular life feed into the place that you want to go, and connecting with me on that level and being able to share with me your story of carving out 5 or 10 hours a week to go make an impact in an organization that means something to you, and demonstrating that you're learning the same skill sets. Like that shows a lot more than just the like experience. And again, like I look for impact players. I'm looking for people who are going, like can figure it out, who ask great questions, who have a great story. When I meet a marketer that like can't tell me their career story, I met one today. He is not moving forward in the process because he couldn't tell me what he loved about the discipline and how he got to where he got to. And so having that story, like, and like the various different pieces of how you can tell that story. I mean, people ask me, how did you get into marketing? And I start my story with like being an MIS major and like coding, but being a really shitty coder and being the person on the team that did business requirements, right? I did all the presentations to, you know, our quote unquote clients, and I took all the business requirements and translated it into IT requirements. And that was like my first step into communications and marketing. It has nothing to do with communications or marketing, but it's how I tell my story. And so I really think, you know, there's lots of ways, but you have to like craft that story and be able to tell. I mean, there's all sorts of experiences that you can pull into that. So,
and if you weren't here in December, we actually had an awesome event about career seeking, switching, and strategizing. And I think making transferable skills is so much more important than people think, right? If you have been a barista, like you mentioned, like that's customer service, right? Like make your skills transferable and relatable, but like really just thinking like, what at the end of the day were you actually doing and adding value?
Well, and like, I mean, that's a great example, right? Because if somebody came into me and said something like, I want to be, you know, this is my first product marketing job, but I worked at Starbucks for 15 months or whatever. And here's my like ideal customer persona. Here's what like my persona looked like in that role. I'd be like, you're hired. Like that's a product marketer. Like the way that you think. I always ask the question of product marketers, what's your favorite product? And I watch them like, do they geek out on products? Or are they like telling me, you know, some story of something that doesn't really mean much to them? I ask them to share with me, you know, the last time like product marketing on a consumer product helped them make a purchase. And if they can't tell you that story, then I know they're not going to be a fit. But if you can start to like, even if you're telling the story of something completely different, but you're weaving in like, I was a barista and my ideal customer profile was, you know, this person. I know you've done your homework, you know, the discipline you're moving into, like you can connect the dots and that story becomes even more powerful.
So Heather, we're maybe a little bit behind time, and people are starting to post their job postings already. I think they're getting excited.
Well, I'll wrap up. We'll do one more per everyone pretty quickly here, because I know some of these last ones people definitely want to know if that's good. And we'll wrap up to the rest of the Q&A. But Sarah, I'll ask you, ghosting is a common term in our vernacular. It's in dating, it's in job seeking. What is a typical timeline, and how do people know if they've been ghosted by a company?
That's a great question. And you know, obviously I think Kim's got a different timeline than maybe Brian or Angela or myself, right? So for us, we've got a longer timeline. We're very, very transparent upfront about what that timeline is, right? We walk through every single step, every single touch point they can expect. But let's just say the generic term, I'd say right now, the longest cycle you're going to have for recruiting in technology is maybe 4 weeks. And as we heard before, right now, candidates are going off the market in 4 days. So I'm seeing that condensed more consistently down to maybe 2 weeks, where you're rapidly going through from, first point of contact to offer. And, in that time, somewhere between that 2 and 4 weeks, if you've repeatedly reached out to your contact at a company and they have not followed up, you are being ghosted. To me, that is like the employer brand killer. I have purposely gone out of my way to embed as many processes as we can into our recruiting team to prevent that, because no candidate should be left behind, but it happens. So to me, in my opinion, if you've reached out through multiple means, 3 times over the course of 3 weeks or more, you're probably being ghosted, or they're taking you on some weird long journey that they're unwilling to share with you, and you'll probably have another job, which is, to me, just bad employer branding, bad candidate management. So you got to give recruiters time, or your employer contact time to respond to you. So that might not be hours or a day. It might be 2 or 3 days, but over the course of time, if you've reached out, 2, 3 times, at that point, I would say you're probably getting ghosted.
And like you said, it's impacting the brand. And Brian, I love that it just happened to you. I mean, not that it happened to you, but the timing. But so companies, if they're getting thousands of applicants, how does a company's name not get tarnished in the interview process when they almost just have too many people to respond to? And it maybe isn't intentional ghosting, but their name gets, branded along the way.
Yeah, it's candidate experience, right? So, but everything. So Tara, to your point, like the employer brand, that's your reputation. That's what people talk about. Working at your company when you're not in the room, right? And so it's understanding all of those things. Every single thing, every interaction with a company impacts that employer brand, but specifically the candidate experience, because overwhelmingly, most of the people aren't going to get the job. That's just a fact. You post a job, unless you're hiring multiples, over 99% of the applicants, and I'll say applicants, not necessarily candidates, because there's a difference. We'll have a drink later, but 99% of them won't get the job. So you have to engineer your process for that. Now, the biggest area of feedback that I can give for that is asking the question up front. Don't be afraid to ask, what should I expect around a timeline? What is your normal timeline? Do you have it documented? A lot of companies don't. But if you ask them, they'll tell you, oh, usually it'll take 2 to 4 weeks for us to get through this process. If somebody told you, if you were interviewing for a job and it was your dream job, it was amazing, and you were just like, oh my gosh, if I could just get this job, that would be so like life-changing. And they told you that the recruiting process was 18 to 24 months. You could at least know and make an adjustment to say, okay, if I want that, now I know what the process is going to be. But nobody does that. Nobody tells you anything. Nobody tells you unless you ask, what is our normal process? Oh, it usually takes us about 3 to 4 weeks. So first question is, what is your normal recruiting process? How long should this take? And the second one is, okay, so because I don't want to be a stalker, how should I follow up with you if I don't hear back? And that's the other bit, is like a good recruiter will say, I will follow up with you. A great recruiter will actually follow up with you.
It's excellent. We make sure, because that is such an important aspect of the whole experience for our applicants. We make sure that at the end of the interview, we just automatically provide them what to expect. You can expect to hear from us next week, because that's so important for them to know that, because it's so competitive and they have other options. So we make sure to say that and then actually follow through. So happy to hear, others are having the same experience.
And I know Diane put.
Right. I was going to say that Diane asked a great question, and she says, like, how do you keep your second person warm if your first person doesn't take it? And honestly, and I want to bring this up because this has happened to me where they literally told me, well, you weren't our first choice, but our first choice didn't take the job. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be your second choice. Like, I'm not interested anymore. You know what I mean? Like that it really was it's like the opposite of like keeping me warm to the job. So what do you guys do? You know what I mean? Like, how long do you wait for that first person, and how do you make sure that second person isn't like already finding another job? Or is there anything you can do?
Second person's almost always finding another job. I don't know, I guess that's my opinion, unless it's the dream job. I try to market it better, frankly, right? Not like, hey, you're my second chance. I know who my first pick is, and then I give those, following an elongated timeline with some cushion for me to be able to get through the process I plan to get through to be able to give them a response. And I also talk more about, at this time, this is the person I needed, and try to talk about those changes in case I do make a hiring decision, but it wasn't because I didn't love you. Just in this moment at this time, we needed this other person, but I've got other opportunities. I don't want to lose this relationship. Let's keep that warm. Because there are unique situations where a different person is more qualified, not because you're not qualified.
Right.
Yeah, so I'll throw something out there Angela, were you going to say something, Kim?
No, I just was agreeing with everything she said.
So for me, it's asking, they'll never tell you how many other people are in the process, but if you say, are there other people in the process, right? So you let them know, hey, we're still going through. Some of the best recruiters have told me, as I'm in the process, they'll say, hey, we just started our process, so we've got to get through some cycles of interviews, so it's going to be 2 to 3 weeks as we go through this. So you're really early on, so just to build in that expectation. The other thing that I've done that is also a poker move is telling the recruiter, depending upon how bad you want the job, depending upon how much time has passed, is letting them know that you've entered the process for interviewing for a different role, so that now if they want to keep you warm, they have to keep you updated. So again, you don't want to necessarily make something up, but you could say, yeah, I'm in the process for 2 other roles right now, and I'm in second round interviews, or whatever the case may be. And just say, hey, I'm trying to balance here because things are moving fast. And I want to know, should I love you. Basically, by the way, you always want to tell them that they're your first choice, even if they're not your first choice. But that gives them motivation to keep you in the loop.
I love that. And again, stick around. This will be the last question on the panel, but we will get to some of your Q&As. But we do have a couple more things that we want to talk about after this. But I do want to talk about this because I feel like the word culture is a lot of up to interpretation, as well as the word diversity. So Angela, I want to ask you, more and more candidates are interested in working in diverse environments. So how do you showcase the diversity you have at your company? And if you're a candidate, what's a good way to inquire about whether the company has my expected level of diversity?
Absolutely. This is an excellent question. And as Austin is very, very diverse, we're so diverse. We're diverse in thought, age, gender, ethnicity, religion, disability, sexual orientation, education, national origin, and a lot of others. And so making sure that an organization really honestly has a true value for diversity and inclusion is vital. It's vital for the city of Austin because we provide our services to the public that are very diverse. You should be able to tell very quickly if you're looking on the company's website if they value diversity. Now, I'm going to talk about what they say versus actually what they do. That should be upfront on their marketing materials. For example, the city of Austin, diversity and inclusion is part of our values. That's part of our vision statement. It's part of our strategic plan. We have an equity officer that works in the city manager's office who makes sure that the city of Austin always has that in the forefront. Our department, the City of Austin Development Services Department, we have an equity officer as well, who makes sure that we are always looking for opportunities to provide services and not lose sight of diversity and inclusion. And so it should be apparent on what you see online, as well as what you see when you look at the employees. How do they engage with a variety of employees, a variety of people? Do you see that reflected in their leadership, not just the staffing, but is it reflected in leadership? For me, this is I mean, I can keep talking about this forever. I'm telling you, it has to be real. It can't just be something that they put on a little sticker and say we're diverse and we're, we are inclusive. You will know by what you see. And these are questions you need to ask, because if it matters to you as much as it matters to me and others, you want to make sure that you're making very good decisions on where you're moving for your career. That's going to be very important for you. And I'm one that believes that it's important for us to make sure that our organizations have a representation and inclusion as we are providing services or whatever it is that we're offering to the public, because you don't want one type of way to provide those services. You won't, you're not going to be successful long term. You want to hear the various viewpoints that come up from a variety of people. So that's what I would say is look to see what they value. That stuff is already part of their marketing materials, but also what you see when you're looking at what their leadership looks like, what the departments look like, what type of programs are they providing to the customers, who are they serving, are they mindful of all? And so that is something that I think is vital. I think it's where we are when we talk about what's changed over the last several years. A lot has changed, including this. Diversity and inclusion is a must for organizations who want to be successful long term.
Love it.
Heather and I are both like, love it. So we are at 7 o'clock, which is when we kind of wanted to end our panel. There was one question kind of general to everybody about what are employees looking at when looking at your LinkedIn profile? And I think that's a great question, because we're all like, how do I make sure I have a great profile? How do I make sure mine doesn't look like everybody else's? Like, what do I need to do to stand out? So I don't know who wants to chime in first, but can we talk a little bit about that? Like are LinkedIn profiles more or less important than resumes? Should we all be trying to blog things? Like, what do we need to do to stand out these days?
I think they are just as important, if not more important than resumes. Now, my view might be a little bit different than a recruiter who is, going through the resumes, but my first inclination when I hear of someone who's in the process with either my recruiting team or my leadership team, the hiring managers, is to go find them on LinkedIn and see what they're all about. So I think your baseline is that your LinkedIn profile reflects your resume, right? A great LinkedIn profile reflects who you are as a person. And that's the beauty of, LinkedIn versus the resume. And so having a really great bio in the bio section, who you are as a person, what you do, like I include my philanthropic work, I include what I do in the Austin community, I include some things that make that I am a long distance runner. And so I've got tenacity and grit, and then I do share a perspective and a point of view through the blogs that are available on LinkedIn. You can link to your professional and creative portfolio if you have one. Like, make it show who you are as a human, not just who you are as an employee, because those things intersect, and we're hiring humans. And so I think, there is a ton of value to putting time and effort into making your LinkedIn profile reflect who you are, as well as what you do, right? The resume is the baseline, but having a perspective on things that are important to you, and able to share the human side of your experience as well is really important.
I'll say +1 to everything that Kim just said. And I'll also add, because I've spent I made a career decision back in 2013 when I had some health problems, and I was like, what do I really want to do? I have to step back and I have to make a decision. Where do I want to be? What are my audiences? How do I really go after my audiences and build my personal brand? I decided to aim small at the specific focus to build my personal brand. So I know I've literally got diagrams of who are my audiences and how do I build those. I'm a marketer. I'm sorry. I will, forgive me, but that is how I operate. So figuring out how I speak to them, what kind of information to share. So I have RSS searches, I have Google alerts around specific kinds of content, informational content, thought leadership, for those specific audiences. So I'm thinking about what kind of information they need to share. Is it a little bit different that because I work in recruiting and I have to be a little bit more nimble? Yes, but I've only got 3 audiences. By and large, I've got 3 audiences. Like an engineer who comes to my profile might find something interesting that I've posted, but for the most part, it's HR and recruiting, it's marketing. No, that's it. HR, recruiting, and marketing. Sorry. I'm a marketer, but I'm not a great speaker. So it's just understanding that those are your audiences. And so building your personal brand, to Kim's point, understanding that you are human and that you're bringing other things to the mix. I shared a post about how I was a florist for 7 years and what are the specific things that I learned in that time that made me a better candidate, made me a better human, made me a better person thinking about different things. So all those things, I share lots of stuff. By the way, I support Hot Lab Rescue, Heart of Texas Lab Rescue in Austin, is a great organization. I post that on my LinkedIn. I post a whole bunch of stuff on there, but what you're doing is you're curating your story. So thinking about LinkedIn as their channel to see what you're about. And so I can't recommend going through that thought process and consideration on your own. Somebody who's a long distance runner might, like Kim, might automatically know, this is what's important to me. This is my personality. This is how I show up, right? But you might not know that. So having that consideration, having that thought, and then picking different things that you can share that show off those traits. Super big fan of using LinkedIn. There are lots of other sources, but LinkedIn's a great one to showcase who you are as a whole person, because we like our humans that way.
Well, just a short and sweet plug on like what my view on LinkedIn is. I was interviewing a senior engineering manager for a job in my company. I think at some point I received his resume, but I was looking at his LinkedIn profile. And as we were going through things, I was like, oh, interesting. I don't see that on your LinkedIn. He's like, oh, well, it was on my resume. I'm like, oh yeah, that attachment you sent me. I'll go find that. Like that's just me naturally as a person. I go to LinkedIn, I see what you're up to. I'm checking out, your portfolios and things like that.
That's great. And I think we have one question came in is like, how do you politely decline? Like you say, hey, I want help. And then someone's like, how about this? And you're like, yeah, no, thanks. So, right. Like, how do you make sure you're tailoring your message and asks for helps and politely decline things? I think
politely decline and offer, for that person to send you a job description, and if you know people, that would be perfect. I mean, at the end of the day, like we are all a network. And so it's not necessarily just about you either. It could be about the people that you know. And if you happen to know somebody that would be a great fit, like it's very easy to politely decline because you're still being helpful.
I love it. So we have on our agenda, if I try and be taskmaster, 5 minutes for questions. Are there any other questions for the group? If anybody wants to turn on their camera, unmute, ask questions to our panel, we've got, 4 minutes at this point that you can do that. And then we've got to move on.
And shout out to our sponsors. I know Elsie just popped this up here, right? Obviously tonight, Dev 10, Genesis 10. Thank you, Tara and everyone for all the great content there. But we have some amazing sponsors, as you can see here. If you're interested in sponsoring, definitely let us know. We'd love to engage with you and your company, but just thank you to all of our sponsors on here. And we've still got who's looking and who's hiring coming up. So keep sticking with us.
Yeah, and I believe there was a question I said I would come back to, and at this point I don't remember because I think I'm on
The hybrid versus in-person.
Yes. Remote hiring versus in-person. How has that changed cultures?
I'm going to jump in on this one and then I'll pass it over because I'm very passionate about this. I think I understand that people want flexibility and want to be able to find roles that make their, their life and their professional work. I will just, tell you, and I've told this to many internship classes that I've talked to recently and in college level classes, is that there is so much happenstance that happens in a hybrid and in-person environment. And yes, we should be figuring out how to make that happen in remote, but it's not happening. So maybe in the future it will happen. But if I were, in anyone's situation, not only would I be demanding a hybrid situation, but I would be demanding that my leadership team embrace a hybrid situation. So many of the great things that have happened to me in my career, whether it's great ideas, great networking, great career opportunities, has happened because I got pulled into a meeting. And I got to be a fly on the wall. It was because I was sitting in Michael Dell's conference room at 6:30 in the morning, and he stopped in and had a conversation with me to learn about what I was working on. It was because, I had a great mentorship conversation over coffee in the office and was connected to 5 other people. And I know the world will get better at remote, but we're not there yet. And so, I still think there is value in a hybrid environment. I don't think we need to be in the office 5 days a week, 8 or 9 hours a day. But I do think that having time to connect and time to collaborate and time to brainstorm and time for happenstance is absolutely still critical.
I agree 100%.